Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Practically Spiritual podcast. For those who are just tuning in and just joining us, hello and welcome. For those who don't know me, my name is Deanna, and I'm an intuitive card reader, psychic, channeler, seer, and animal communicator. And I started this podcast to share some of the great wisdom and tidbits that not only come through my readings, but also what I've learned along my spiritual journey, because I think the more we share those common truths, those common experiences, those common emotions, the things we're all going through, but none of us seem to really talk about, I think just the easier, the smoother, and the more supported life feels. So, and I also, as you can, if you listen to any of my other episodes, you will hear me drone on about it. I'm a big believer that your spiritual practice or whatever your spiritual beliefs are, have to meet you where you are in your life and be practically applicable, relatable, and grounded, and allow a lot of space for everything that comes at us in this human experience. So that was, the motivation behind starting this podcast. And so this is actually episode number 8, which is so wild to me and so joyful that we're already 8 episodes in. And honestly, what, this little intro I'm doing is actually the perfect segue into today's topic. So today we're continuing on with our 5-part series of tips for living practically spiritual. Now, if you haven't caught the first 3, today we're on number 4, but the first 3 were become your own best friend, life is a spiritual scavenger hunt, and that there are no wrong turns. If you're interested, go back and check out those episodes. There's some really juicy stuff in those. And again, you don't have to check them out for this to be applicable for you, but I think they're some of the core truths that have come across in readings. And so they're like kind of the 5 main things I really wanted to share starting this podcast. And of course, check out the other episodes too. I've got some great guests that add so much flavor to these episodes. So far, Ryan Smith has been my partner in crime, but I've got some other great guests lined up for you as well. So definitely stay tuned. But today we're talking about tip number 4. So our number 4 tip for living practically spiritual is be where you are. Now, this topic is, I think, one of the more challenging, but also one of the more meaningful. And it's funny because it sounds so simplistic, right? Just be where you are. Easy peasy, right? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. But it reminds me of that meme where it's like, I thought it was going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy, but it turns out it was difficult lemon difficult. So what I want to say is we're going to talk about all the different ways that this shows up, both on our end, but also on, from everything Spirit's communicated with me about what being where you are means, and how we can use that to help us heal and help us to expand, and what it really means to be where we are. But we're also going to talk about some of the contributing factors that kind of make it hard for us to do that. So I do want to break it down in a very practical sense. But so when we're talking about being where you are, I would definitely say physically is important, right? Like be where you are physically. And one of the great ways, so in the spiritual community, we might call this being grounded, right? When we feel like we're in our head and we're living in all these, what if this and maybe that, and maybe I should be doing this, and where is this going, and what's already happened, right? When we're living in the past or the future, we tend to be ungrounded because we're stuck in our head and we're not very present with where we are. So what I want to say first and foremost is that a great practice for grounding your energy, right, and for getting yourself into the present moment with where you are is to just feel your feet where they are. Feel your feet on the earth, or if it's something physical, or touch something and just be really present to something physical. So that's like the very first thing I want to talk about is just a quick grounding strategy. So what I want to do at the beginning of this podcast is, if you haven't had a chance today, we're going to take a little bit of a slow moment here. Take a deep breath and find your feet. If you're driving, that's okay. Feel your feet on the pedals. If you're sitting in a chair, feel your feet on the floor. If you're outside, right? Find a way to connect with at least some part of your body, but I think our feet tend to be a really great practice for this. And just take that deep breath and find your center. Find the now moment, right? This is all we have right now. But most of the time what we're doing is that we're thinking about, we're ruminating on the past and thinking about things that have already happened. But what I find even more so, especially in readings, is that we're thinking so much about the future, right? And we spend so much of our time wishing that we were in the next chapter already, trying to get somewhere else, trying to move into that next phase, trying to create that next endeavor. And so much of what I do in readings has to do with us feeling stuck or trapped or like we've lost momentum or like we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And what I find is most of the time in those cases, Spirit usually advocates for us to just be there, to just be in the in-between, which is such an uncomfortable place to be. And what I want to say is it is the most uncomfortable place for me as well. But it really does serve a purpose. And when we're always wishing that we're getting to the next element of our journey, or not, when we're not present to where we are, right? And what I want to say is being present where you are, again, it's where you are in your life. What I want to say is physically or circumstantially, or like maybe we're in a place in life that we don't want to be. Like maybe we're in a rough home situation, or maybe we're living somewhere we don't enjoy, or maybe we're working at a job we don't really, really love, right? And maybe we're just unhappy with that aspect. But what I want to say is, and that is one element of being where you are. And we'll talk a little bit later about why being where you are, even if it's not where you want to be in this moment, can actually be such a helpful tool and why it's so crucial. But there's also the element of being where you are internally, right? And especially on the spiritual healing path, there's a couple different ways this shows up. So usually we don't allow space for us to not be where we think we should be as far as like our personal growth. So sometimes what I notice is this will show up as, how am I back in this situation? I've already learned this. I've already done this. How am I repeating this? I thought I learned so much. I thought I grew so much, right? When we're in that, where you can feel all of the judgment that's coming up in that cycle. But if we allowed ourselves to be where we are in this moment, it doesn't mean we didn't progress. It just means that's where we are right now. Right? So being where you are also applies to allowing yourself to feel the way you feel in this moment, to be at the place you are in this moment, right? And like what I want to say is another great example of where we can let ourselves be where we are internally is if like, and I'm so this person, like usually when we've noticed a pattern, but we can't quite change it yet. And so like, and what I want to say is, let's just say it's in people pleasing, right? That's a great example. Let's say we're noticing ourselves people pleasing and not holding boundaries that we know we need to be holding, right? And we may even think it like, oh no, this is crossing that boundary. But then what comes out of our mouth is that old pattern or that thing we would have normally said, or we're not holding that line anymore, right? And so being where we are is also saying, okay, that's where I'm at right now. I'm at the place of knowing better, but not being able to do better yet. But usually what we do is we beat ourselves up and we try and make ourselves change. We try and force ourselves into where we think we should be. But that's actually pretty counterproductive. And again, we'll get into that in a minute about how healing and growth and actually shifting old patterns is so intertwined with being where you are and accepting where you're not where you want to be. Okay, so again, we'll get there. But one thing that Spirit always brings through that I think really helps me with the present moment aspect, and again, we all need these reminders. So, just this is something that is a continual, just keep checking in, reminding yourself that it's where you're meant to be. But when we're in the past or the future, we're always looking towards that next chapter, that next endeavor, and getting into that next place in life. What we're doing is that we're missing what is happening right now. And what we forget about is that what is happening right now, no matter how it's showing up, right now is the path, right? And what I want to say is in so many readings, we'll come in and we'll ask like, am I on the right path? What path should I be taking? And sometimes Spirit will use it like a trailhead. And in previous episodes, I've used the example of the trailhead analogy. But really what they want to do is, so when I'm getting these kinds of like, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right things? The analogy they always give me are stepping stones. So they always show me those round garden stepping stones. And they're kind of showing like we're standing on one and we're going to go where we place the next one. And then we're going to take that one step forward. And then from there, we're going to be able to choose where we want to put that next stepping stone, right? So in that instance, right, and what I want to say is it is how it is like the And it's not just in that one circumstance of like, I don't know if I'm on the right path. At every point, the stepping stone that we are currently standing on, so again, where we are is the very stepping stone that is the only path. So we are always standing on the one and only path because we are literally paving the road as we walk, right? And so when we aren't able to accept where we are now, we kind of give away all of our power to be able to decide what stepping stone needs to be placed there next and make conscious decisions about where we want to go. So really, if you think about it from that perspective, the only stepping stone, the only thing that matters is the stepping stone that we are currently standing on, because the only place that we can actually build from. And again, I think that perspective really helps us to shift where we're feeling like we should be somewhere else that we're not. Because we're able to honor, like, you know what, I might not have chosen this as my, this might not have been my chosen stepping stone or how I wanted to feel or where I wanted to be standing, but right now, this stepping stone is where I have the resources to put down my next stepping stone, right? And we're laying them as we go, which is also another great reminder for the There Are No Wrong Turns episode. Because again, when you're laying those stepping stones, you can place whatever you want wherever you want. So you don't have to be afraid of, well, if I place that stepping stone there and I don't actually want to go that way later, you just place your next stepping stone in a different direction. Right? You can always place those stepping stones where you want, but it does mean that like we have to be honoring where we are right now, because if we're not in the honoring of where we're standing in this moment, it's really hard to gather all of the resources and all of the information and all of the clarity and all of the insight that might be offered that would help us clarify where we want to go, right? So like one thing this comes up a lot around is maybe like career. So sometimes when we're wanting to switch jobs, we'll just be so like, I really hate what I'm doing, right? I don't like what I'm doing. I don't want to do this job anymore. I just want out, right? And what I always hear Spirit advocate for is for us to make a list of like what we really like about that job, what worked for us, what didn't work. And when we're looking at the what isn't working column, there's always a flip side of the coin to what isn't working that is actually what we want, right? So let's just say like it's a 9 to 5. Right? If we're like, I hate working 9 to 5, I hate being in the office, right? So what that tells us is the information we're gathering from that is, oh, I might like to work at a place that has a flexible schedule and where I can make my own schedule, right? Or where I can work from home. So that gives us criteria for what we want to look for next, right? So where we might want to place that next stepping stone, what direction we might want to move in. But when we're not taking into account where we are and honoring that where we are is the path and has so much valuable information to us, we can't use it in order to create something better with that next stepping stone. And that's where we get stuck in a rut where we keep creating the same patterns over and over again, right? And we see it in relationships. We'll leave a relationship that had certain patterns and ended a certain way, and then we'll jump into the next one. And because we're not evaluating what that stepping stone taught us, what we learned about it, we're not consciously placing the stepping stone where we're going. We're kind of just following old patterns, right? We're just like, well, the path has always gone this way, so we're going to keep going that way. But when we're really aware of where we are in this moment, we're able to garner all of that information, all of the wisdom, and garner all the wisdom from the stepping stones we've already walked. Which again, when you really start calculating that up, you're going to realize how much power you have, not just to make decisions, but like, you know, so much more than what we give ourselves credit for, even if we're not able to act on it in that moment. Just the recognition of what is there sinks in over time. And over time, that creates different actions and shifts and conscious decision making that leads to a path that's a more fulfilling one. Also, another aspect to look at with this is when we are not in the present moment, we tend, again, when I'm saying there's so much wisdom in where we are, we tend to override the wisdom of now in order to get there. And what I want to say is we might be looking, so like, let's just say we're looking like way down the road at the destination we want to get to. Say we're walking from, Florida to New York, right? we may be just so looking at New York that we're not paying attention to the stepping stone that we're on. But when we're not paying attention to the stepping stone that we're on, we're missing all of the wisdom that would actually assist us in getting to New York, right? And so we can feel a little bit overwhelmed if we're not taking more of the stepping stone approach to getting where we'd like to go. But again, we're more focused on getting there than we are than being here. But going there, like just kind of jumping there, there's no growth, there's no wisdom, there's no learning, there's no fulfillment. Whereas when we're on the stepping stone now, there's wisdom that can be garnered from being in this moment. So, just a personal example where I'm seeing this show up for me right now, where I'm having to be mindful of overriding my wisdom and the now moment to try and get somewhere in the future. I'm currently dating someone that I'm very excited about, and it's been a conscious effort to pull my energy back and to make sure that I am being in the now moment, right? We're in the beginning stages where everything is exciting and fun and connective and the possibilities are wide open. But I find myself wanting to go down the rabbit hole of what's it going to be? Where are we going? Like really wanting to, and like almost wanting to push the envelope of going further and deeper than where this now moment is necessarily aligned with. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to get somewhere better, right? Or not even better, right? Because right now is pretty fun. Like, it doesn't mean that we're not going to go further down the road. It doesn't mean that I won't get to an outcome that I'm really going to enjoy, right? But when I'm rushing towards the outcome that I want and trying to move that forward too fast, what I'm doing is I'm missing out on enjoying these moments for what they are, right? Like we never get that initial honeymoon, goo goo gaga, moon eyes phase in relationships other than in the beginning, right? We might have glimpses, but it's never the same as when you first meet, right? But here I am trying to jump the gun and go, 6 months, a year into the future where we're comfortable and cozy and established and all of these things without really honoring the fact that if we make it that far, these moments are going to be something that we'll look back on, that we'll treasure. And if I jump the gun on that, I might deprive myself of everything that this moment has to offer me in regards to the fullness and the enjoyment of my life and of its unfolding. Right? And that's another thing I love about the stepping stone way of looking at this is it is asking us to be present with where we are in that moment, not just to garner wisdom and make sure that we're making aligned choices, but even more so to enjoy where we are right now, because there's something unique and special where we are in this moment that we can't enjoy otherwise. Right? Another example is as I'm recording this, I'm sitting in a nice library sound booth. It's a unique experience. I enjoy being in here. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like dark and it's, it's all like techie and the library center is so cool and air conditioned. But when I walk out of here, I'm not going to be in this environment anymore. I'll be on the street walking to my car where it's hot, but there's the hustle bustle in the city and there's plants and things outside. So each moment in our life is offering a different kind of experience. And when we're just moving from, I need to get to the next one, we're never truly enjoying like what we are being offered right now. And life is made up of all of those little moments. Right. And so I just think that life becomes so much more beautiful when we're able to, and again, so much easier said than done. And I think it's a lifelong practice. But life is so much richer for being able to savor the moment of where we are versus, what's coming to mind for me is that the Tootsie Pop commercial from the 90s, the owl, where he's like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, right? It's like he's licking it, but then he just bites to the center, right? It just kind of like cuts right to the center part, but it really diminishes the enjoyment of the whole thing that could have really been like, I don't want to say we have to drag everything out, but like that we really could have savored that sucker. Right. And so I think, when we're talking about the stepping stone approach, it really is this being where you are is so much more in alignment with advocacy for truly enjoying your life and savoring all these different kinds of experiences. And the less that we can judge whether or not that experience is better than that one or worse than that one, right? Like I might like AC better than being in the Florida heat right now where it's like 102 degrees outside. But being outside offers things that being inside doesn't, right? So if we can find what's being offered to us moment to moment, our life just becomes more open and expansive and joyful. And another aspect to think about when we're talking about this is when we're always trying to skip to that next moment, or we're trying to move ahead, and we're not being present with where we are. We are subliminally telling ourselves that we are not enough, or that life is not enough right now where we are. And again, that's another thing that will pull us out of the enjoyment of the present moment, but it also feeds those subconscious narratives of not enoughness and of achievement and of hustle culture and all of those things that just detract joy out of our experience of life. So it's another aspect of where we can, being in the present moment, can also just start healing the parts of us. And you'll notice there might be some resistance to being in the present moment because of those narratives, which we'll talk more about later. It's definitely, I think the hustle culture is one of the main contributing factors to this really strong challenge in being where we are. So let's talk a little bit about how healing and growth happens during the being where you are phase, right? When we can really be present to where we are, that is when the most healing and growth happens. So in every healing modality I've ever experienced, right? What I want to say is, whether you're meditating, or whether you're doing ayahuasca, or whether you're in therapy, or you're doing breath work, or you're just, doing your best to muddle through life. If you think about the moments in your life where you have made the greatest shifts, the most profound shifts in the way that you think about something, you feel about something, you go about something, it's in the moments where we accept what is, right? I'll never forget at there was a moment where I realized, like, I was telling all these stories about what a relationship in my life was. But once I really looked at, wait a minute, what is actually the truth? And I really was able to pull back and say, oh, like, that's what is. Everything shifted because I was no longer working with the fantasy, and I was no longer working with untruths, and I was no longer working with the future or the past or what I hoped would happen or the potentials or where we'd already been. I was really present with what was happening right now. And that's where I got the power to be able to understand what I needed to do next, right? And what part of me needed to shift, or what part of me needed to grow, or what part of me needed to draw a boundary, right? If you think about in therapy, the things that like really click for us are when we realize the truth of why something's happening, right? And you can't, so it's like, again, if we're in therapy because like I always attract people like this, well, that light switch goes on when we realize like, oh shoot, like the reason I'm always attracting people like this is because of this mentality I have, right? And when we're in the recognition of where we are right now, not where we've been, not where we're going, not what could be, where we are operating from right now, that is where we're able to create change, right? We cannot change anything in our lives unless we are in complete recognition and acceptance of where we are, not where we want to go. Right? And when we're in that present moment, we become more capable of making intentional and conscious choices and shifts because we're actually working with real information, right? We're not trying to plug false information into a problem in order to get a solution. We're actually plugging, it's like algebra, we're actually plugging in the right amounts, or I don't even know, you can tell, well, I know math. It was not my subject. But like we're actually plugging in the right amounts to get the solution we need. Whereas when we're operating off of non-now aspects, where we might be filling ourselves with a lot of extra noise rather than that. And what I want to say is when we're not willing to be where we are or to recognize where we are, that's the time that we're going to see escapism pop up the most. So this can look like a lot of different things, right? And again, we all do it. So, and I even recognizing I am in escapism right now is what helps us move out of escapism, right? And there's no judgment on it. It's just like I've gone through times where, definitely, watching a lot of TV because my life was stressful and I would just needed to check out into fantasy, right? Or drinking or drugs or being over socialized, like staying too busy, being too invested in other people's stuff. There's a lot of different ways escapism can show up, right? But when we're in escapism, it's usually because we're trying to avoid the discomfort of accepting, embracing, or being present with where we are right now in the moment. But again, being where we are right now in the moment and accepting it fully is how we would move out of whatever it is that's making us uncomfortable. And again, it sometimes does come with the acceptance of, I might be uncomfortable for a little while, right? But it reminds me of a phrase that I can't even remember where I heard it, but it just has stuck with me so much. Trying to create a positive experience is a negative experience. Allowing a negative experience is a positive experience. Right? So usually we're saying, I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to feel like that. But it's actually a very negative experience for us to continue to avoid feeling where we are, even if where we are doesn't feel good. But the avoidance of it also feels crappy. So there's something really beautiful in saying, you know what? Okay, I might be uncomfortable for a little while, or this is hard to look at, but it's cathartic to see it, right? Allowing ourselves to go there and to say, that sucks, can actually feel really, really good. And again, not in like a joyful, like, oh my God, I just feel like sunshine way, but in a cathartic, healing acceptance. And it usually tends to just relieve all the tension in the body we're feeling from the things that we don't really want to look at. Now, another aspect of this that I really wanted to talk about with being where you are is part where this plays into our spiritual connection. So all that exists on the spiritual level is the present moment, right? There is no separation. So when we're talking about connecting with spirit, whether you're trying to hone your intuition, you want to feel guidance, you want to connect with spirit guides, you want to feel into your path, you want to just have a relationship with whatever that higher power is, however you frame it. Spirit meets us where we are. So the more in acceptance of where we are right now we are, the more open and relaxed and more aligned with our own channel to the spiritual or the divine that we are. And so and what I want to say is this is one of the main reasons why, I'll always advocate, and I tell people all the time, like usually if I'm in a place where I need a reading, I don't read for myself, right? Because when I'm doing a reading for myself, unless I'm pretty, unattached, I'm too invested in the outcome, which means I'm in the future, right? Or I'm looking at that next chapter, or I'm afraid of the past reoccurring that's making me attached to the way something has to go. So I do not read for myself when I'm in distress or when I'm really invested in something, because it's really hard to be in the present moment and in pure acceptance of what is, when you're in a place of what you want to happen, which clogs my channel and doesn't allow me to receive as freely. So, but with that said, one of the most beautiful spiritual truths that's been given to me since I've been doing this for, over 6 years, is that spirit meets us where we're at, no matter what that means, right? And when I really heard this, it really sunk in with me as this is the core of unconditional love. Now, being where we are, and what I want to say is this translates to our own relationship with ourselves as well. When we say, okay, me, this is where you are right now, and that's okay. I love you. This is where we are right now. This is what's going on in life right now. This is what we're capable of right now. This is how we feel right now. That is telling ourselves, I love you in every state. I love you no matter how you're showing up. I love you even when you're feeling like that. I love you even when you're feeling unmotivated. I love you even when you're noticing that you're stuck in escapism. I love you even when you're being a jerk and you can't reel it in. I love you even when you're watching TV for 6 hours a day and you're depressed, right? When we say like, okay, that is what is. I'm a mess, or I'm angry, or I'm, any of it, right? It's literally unconditional love that says, wherever you can receive me, I will meet you, right? And so when we do it with ourselves, that is super healing, right? But Spirit's also kind of given me a little bit of an example of this, and I've been waiting for the right time to share it, and I felt like this was the episode. So we all have different ideas and relationships with that higher power. Now, what I want to say before I even talk about this is I think any method that anybody finds that assists them in connecting with something higher, that gives their life more meaning, more purpose, more guidance, more connection, and some kind of trust or faith in a larger picture. I think that it is such a vital, I think humans are spiritual by nature, right? I think, it's that phrase where spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience. And so I think all paths are great, right? And if that's where you're at, that's where you're at, right? And unconditional love also says, I let other people be where they're at as well, which is, I think, an even harder one to kind of master because, and I want to say if we can't do it with ourselves, we definitely can't do it with other people, but we usually tend to want to shift people into being the way that we are, especially if we feel like the way that they are maybe going about it is not in their highest good. But what spirit, I'm sorry, I'm like beating around the bush here. I feel I'm saying, getting to the point. So for example, Spirit will meet us where we're at out of unconditional love. So what this means is if we can only perceive that the spiritual connection we can have is one with a vengeful, jealous, punitive, heaven and hell, good or bad type of God, it doesn't mean that we're disconnected or that we're not connected to Spirit, because Spirit will show up through whatever filter we're capable of having with them. So this is where you get people who say like, God told me this and they feel such a strong spiritual connection. And other people will say, that doesn't sound like God to me. That sounds, and not to say that our egos don't get mixed in, right? But Spirit does not pull back from connecting with somebody just because their ego might also be involved. Right? So I think it's so beautiful the way that Spirit shows up and meets us where we are, because they do not discern who's worthy of having that spiritual connection and who's not, and to the point that they are willing to show up in ways that are not necessarily totally in alignment with the truth of how they would like to show up, because they would rather us feel connected and supported to something and to them than to feel alone, even if that means that we may have to interact with them through a filter that may cause harshness in our lives. So I just want to share that because I want to say I feel like it totally blew the box open for me and really helped me to kind of just sink even more into what the truth of unconditional love was. But I also felt like it might kind of help us to understand, and for me personally, I grew up in a very, what I want to say is strict heaven and hell, black and white Christian household that I no longer identify with those beliefs. But it also helped me to kind of clarify and give myself some space to be where I am now, but also understand that where those that might still hold those beliefs are still receiving spiritual connection that is just as legitimate as mine. It's just filtered through what they're able to receive in that moment, because they are still being flooded with unconditional love and support from the divine. So I just want to share that because it really hit home with me. And again, where you are is where your connection to Spirit and intuition is the strongest, because that is what is really all that there is in the spiritual realm as well. So let's wrap up by just kind of talking a little bit about some of these societal factors. So some of the factors that make it really hard for us to be where we are is definitely the societal hustle culture. I think that's probably the main one, right? And I think the only way to really kind of dismantle this is just becoming aware of where we are buying in to hustle culture and feeling like there's somewhere we're supposed to be that we're not. And if you really think about it, like we have all these arbitrary goals, right? And I can't tell you how often I hear someone say like, well, I'm 30 and I should know this and I should have this career and I should have kids and I should be all these places. There is no one path, right? But when we're in that and what I want to say is usually there's an antsiness in our body where we just feel like we have to do something, but we may not. It feels what I want to say is unless your goal is clear, and what I want to say even more so is if you can't identify what that next one stepping stone would be, it means you might have a little bit of an arbitrary goal that may not actually be yours and may just be a little bit more of the pressures of society telling us that where we are is never enough. And again, that framework and that mindset just pulls us completely out of the joy of life, and we miss everything beautiful about it. So that hustle culture, I think, is just a deconditioning that happens over time, but that we do it by just slowly noticing and noticing and noticing and noticing and bringing ourselves back to, let me take a deep breath and remind myself there's nowhere to be. There's nowhere else I'm supposed to be. I'm on that stepping stone, and it's just my job to enjoy the stepping stone I'm on. And when I feel like it's time, lay the next one when I know where I want to put it. And sometimes Spirit will lay that next stepping stone for you, based on intentions you've set, right? Because we can say, I don't know where to put the next stepping stone. Help me out. So our guides might lay a stepping stone, but what I want to say is it is always our choice and our free will to decide whether or not we would like to step on that stepping stone that's laid down for us as well. So, I'll leave you with one last example. I'm a big fan of metaphor because it helps me to kind of frame these larger spiritual concepts into things that are relatable. One example that they've given me for how we can honor each step that our path brings us and really understand that even if we don't understand where it's all leading, every single step, every single moment plays into the greater whole of our dharma and of our life's work and of our growth and of our evolution and of our, just the story of our life. Which again, I get so sentimental and I love I'm a little bit of a romantic when it comes to life and these little moments that lead to a whole string of life. And it reminds me of the song 100 Years by, I think it's the Foo Fighters. That song, does a great job of kind of connecting us into I'm 15 for a moment, caught in between. You know what I mean? 10 and 20. I'm just dreaming, right? Those are the lyrics. So the time goes by so quickly. So I think it's so important that we're in the moment. But the metaphor, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent. But the metaphor they always give me is the example of a video game. So I don't really play them, but I do know that on some video games, you're supposed to go on quests. So I'm, like Zelda, there's somewhere you're supposed to go. But before you get to that quest or you get to that boss or that whatever, there's certain stops you have to make. You have to talk to certain people and you have to pick up certain supplies and you have to get certain tools along the way, right? And so if we can really live our life and understand that that's how life is orchestrated and that no moment or path is misguided because we're picking things up along the way that we need in order to get where we're going, we can kind of pull back from needing to get there because we're understanding there's just as much depth and learning and giving and receiving and expansion and living that happens in the in-between. And when we think of it like this, there really is no such thing as the in-between. There is just now. And we only feel like there's an in-between because we are stuck between the past and the future, right? And so I think if we can give ourselves some grace to remind ourselves that we're here to live and experience and be open to what comes in for us moment to moment to moment. Again, life becomes more peaceful, more joyful, but we're also more intentional and we can offer ourselves a lot of healing and acceptance in the process. So that is our episode today. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. It's so much fun to be back in the booth, and I will be back with some more episodes, some great guests, and our number 5 tip for living practically spiritual. See you on the next episode.